Hello there, my name is Gary Sims from Android Authority. Now when it comes to fast charging technologies, it seems that the different smartphone OEMs are flicking through their dictionaries trying to find interesting words to describe their technologies. Just saying fast charging doesn't seem to be good enough. We have quick charging and we have turbo power and we have smart power and we have a whole range of actually different names. So today I'm going to be looking at 6 different charging technologies and we're going to try to find out which one is the best. So what are these 6 charging technologies we're going to be looking at? Well, we're going to be looking at Quick Charge 2.0 from Qualcomm. We're going to be looking at VOOC, V-O-O-C, from Oppo. We're going to be looking at PumpExpress from MediaTek. We're going to be looking at TurboPower from Motorola, Adaptive Fast Charging from Samsung, and Smart Power from Huawei. Now to do that, I've got a different phone that uses each of these different technologies, and I'm going to pit them against each other in terms of charging times, in terms of temperatures, in terms of how quickly they get to 50%, how quickly they get to 80%, and so on. Now the phones I'm using are as follows. I'm going to use the Samsung Galaxy Note 4 to test Quick Charge 2.0. I'm going to use the Oppo R7S to test out VOOC. I'm going to use the Vivo X6 to test out MediaTek's PumpExpress Plus. I'm going to use the Moto X Force to look at TurboPower. I'm going to use the Galaxy Note 5 to look at Samsung's adaptive fast charging. And I'm going to use the Mate 8 for Huawei's smart power. So the tests were conducted like this. Each phone was plugged into the adapter that comes with it in the box. I installed an app from the Play Store that measures battery life and tells you how long it took to charge the phone. And every 10 minutes I use an infrared gun to measure the temperature on the back of the device. And then once I've done that for all the phones, I've put together some graphs and some numbers so we can see which one performs the best. So before we go on, I just want to tell you one quick thing about how batteries charge in smartphones. They actually charge in 2 stages. In the first stage, the charger can put in a lot of power right up until the battery gets to about 80%. And then from 80% to 100, less and less power is put into the battery as it is topped up to its full mark. Now because of that, these quick charging technologies always talk about how quickly they can get to 80%. Some even talk about how quickly they can get to 50%, but very rarely do you hear a manufacturer talking about how quickly it can charge the whole battery. And that's because that last 20% can sometimes take 45% of the actual overall charging time. So when we look at these results, we can actually look at how quickly they can get to 80%, but also how quickly does it take to go that last 20% until it gets full. So let's start looking at the results. So I'm just going to go through the different phones and the different charging systems as I've got them written down here on my result sheet. There's no particular order to how I've written them down here. If you want to see all the numbers and analyse them in greater detail, then please do head on over to the AndroidAuthority.com website where you'll find the written article that goes with this video, and I've got tables and graphs there that show you in detail how each of these phones and each of these charging systems worked. Now we're going to start with the Galaxy Note 4. Now the Galaxy Note 4 takes 1 hour and 23 minutes to charge up, and it reaches 80% of its charge cycle in 58.6% of its overall charging time, which is about 48 minutes. It can get to about 50% full in 27 minutes, and one interesting thing is that it has a temperature rise of over 11 degrees during that charging cycle. Next on my list is the Note 5. Now the Note 5 manages to charge up in 1 hour and 36 minutes, and it manages to reach 50% of its charge in 34% of its overall charging time. And it reaches 80% in 60% of its overall charging time, which actually means that it takes the last 20% takes 40% of the time. Hope you're following that. And interestingly, it has a smaller temperature rise than the Note 4. It actually goes up only 8.5 degrees during that whole charging cycle. Next is the Moto X Force. Now the Moto X Force manages to reach its full charge in just 1 hour and 25 minutes. It manages to reach 50% of its charge in 30% of the overall charging cycle. It manages to reach 80% of its charge in just 53% of its overall charging cycle, which is some 45 minutes. And it manages to do that last 20% in an additional 40 minutes. So it's 45 minutes up to 80%, then another 40 minutes until it gets to 100%. And there we can see that 20% actually does take quite a long time to actually charge up. And it also has a very high temperature change during this. It goes up 19.9 degrees from when it's charging from 0 all the way up to 100. So that's quite a large temperature difference. Next on my list is the Huawei Mate 8. Now the Huawei Mate 8 has a 4000 milliamp hour battery. Now it manages to charge up in 2 hours and 10 minutes. And it reaches 50% of its charge in 30% of the overall charging cycle, and it can get to 80% of its charge in 50% of its overall charging cycle, which is just over 1 hour. And it has a relatively good temperature difference. It goes up just 8.4 degrees while it's charging. Now the last two are the Oppo R7S and the Vivo X6. Now looking at the Oppo R7S, we find that it charges in 1 hour and 21 minutes. It manages to get to 50% of its charge in 31% of its overall charging cycle, 80% charge in 53% of its overall charging cycle, which is some 43 minutes. And then it has a temperature rise of just 3 degrees during that charge. That's absolutely fantastic, just 3 degrees. So it is the lowest phone in our comparison here that has the lowest temperature rise across that charging cycle. Compare that to the 19 degrees of the phone we just mentioned a moment ago. And finally the Vivo X6. Now the X6 managed to reach its charging time in 1 hour and 18 minutes, which actually makes it the fastest phone in our group, but of course it only has a 2400 milliamp hour battery. It manages to get to 50% of its charge in 30% of the charging cycle. It manages to get to 80% of its charge in 54% of its charging cycle, which is some 43 minutes. So if you want to get to 80%, it just needs 43 minutes to do that. And it has a modest temperature rise of 8.1 degrees during its charging cycle. So what does all this mean? Well, in terms of which phone charges the fastest relative to its battery size, that award actually goes to the Moto X Force, followed by the Note 4 and then the Oppo R7S. So which phone can get to 50% of its charge quickest compared to its overall charging cycle is the Moto X Force, which uses just 29% of its charging cycle to get to 50%. And then in second place, we have the Huawei Mate 8, which can get to 50% of its charge in just 30% of the overall charging cycle. So which phone can get to 80% of the battery charge in the relatively shortest amount of time compared to the whole charging cycle is the Mate 8, which actually just uses 50% of its charge cycle to get to the 80% point. The Oppo R7S comes in second place, which uses 52% of its overall charge cycle to get to that 80% mark. So in terms of which phone stays the coolest during charging, that prize goes to the Oppo R7S, which has an amazing 3.3 degree temperature rise during the charging cycle. In fact, its closest rival, the Vivo X6, has an 8.1 degree rise during its charging cycle, as also does the Huawei Mate 8 and the Note 5, which have 8.4 and 8.5 degrees respectively. So which phone is the overall winner? Well, that's actually quite hard to say. Not one of these charging systems really demonstrated itself to be much better than any of the others. It's quite an even playing field at this time. If you want that raw power, just one that gets that phone charged the quickest, then you have to go with the Moto X Force. However, that comes with a price, in the sense that it goes up nearly 20 degrees during its charging cycle. That's actually quite warm on the back of the phone. If you are worried about how the temperature affects battery life or how it might damage the phone in the long term, then you really need to look at the Oppo R7 and its VOOC charging system, because that only went up just 3.3 degrees. And if you want a phone that gets to 50% or 80% the quickest, then those prizes really do go again to the Moto X Force, to the Huawei Mate S and the Oppo R7. And so there you have it, my look at the different fast charging systems. My name's Gary Sims from Android Authority, and I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up. Also, please use the comments below to tell me what you think about the different fast charging systems. Do you have one that is a favourite of yours? Also, don't forget to subscribe to Android Authority's YouTube channel. And as for me, I'll see you in my next video. Now, if you stayed here to the end of the film, I just want to give you one quick tip. If you're going to develop a fast charging technology, there are 3 words that I found in the dictionary that haven't yet been used: brisk charging, warp charging, and lickety-split charging. You heard it here first.